I'll try to be brief. So I teach two somewhat controversial courses. They're not really controversial, but they are in light of the way the culture is right now. So one is cross-cultural psychology. The other is sexual behavior. So I'm a very data-driven social scientist. So I try to go, my views are based on what the data seems to support. And I don't try to create studies that's going to confirm what I already believe. I understand that's a big shortcoming of science and social sciences in particular. And so I actively try to make sure I'm not engaging in what we call confirmation bias. Okay. So in the cross-cultural class, we take a critical look at different ethnic groups. When I say critical, I don't mean negative. I'm not there to denigrate any group, but just take a critical look at their what's good, what's bad as a group overall. So I let them know I can't describe every single person in a group. So we're just looking at the group mean, the average or trends for this particular group. And most of the things I say are neutral, but I do get into some aspects about all the groups I cover, including whites, that are problematic or are challenges that seem to affect the group under discussion more so than other groups. So when I cover whites, for example, and I get into their challenges, I'm not making this up. I've been teaching this for decades. One of the things I pointed out is I used to come just like this. I used to point out that it's not uncommon for whites to be hypocrites in many ways, one being on their support for free speech. Imagine that. I used to cover that for decades. They'll say out of one side of the mouth, they support free speech. And then as soon as you say something they don't like, they're trying to silence you one way or the other. And I give the students some examples. I talk about how for whites that we who are whites are so into independence that we socialize our little kids to start putting on their socks as soon as they can by themselves, feeding themselves as soon as they can. White culture, Europe and the United States and Canada. I've never been to Australia, so I don't know. We have these preschools on every corner almost. I'm exaggerating, of course. And you don't find those necessarily in non-white cultures, because most people either have their mothers raising them still, or they have a family member trying to raise their kids. So I talk about how whites have no problem of putting their aging parents in institutions that we euphemistically call nursing homes. So I'm telling you this not to bore you, even though I might be boring you, but let you know I do cover critical things about whites. No problem. No problems in my class. I get to Hispanics, and I'm half Hispanic, by the way, and my students know that. So when I get to the critical things, they're okay with that. Really quickly here, for example, in Latin America, domestic violence is common. I'm not saying every home, but it's common. But the thing about, and it's common everywhere in the world, but the thing that makes it unique to Latin America is, and probably Africa too, but anyway, is neighbors won't get involved. They won't call the police, because there's a cultural notion of you don't get involved in other people's family matters. So they just turn a blind eye to child abuse, domestic violence. So I don't get any problems. I don't get any pushback from Hispanics in my class. It's when I get to two groups, African Americans and Muslims, that I cover in my class. That's where there are individuals in my class who think that I'm not supposed to be saying anything critical about those two groups, as if they're sacred cows. And of course they are sacred cows in the United States. So, and I don't care. I'm not there to worry about their feelings. I'm going to cover what I think is reality, and they can cry me a river, has always been my attitude. And the university has always supported me. The few times these students from different groups go and complain, the university has always backed me. So here we go with George Floyd. George Floyd was a tipping point at UCF. 1 month before he was killed, the university brought on a new president, and his goal was to make UCF the national model for diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Sounds familiar.
So anyway, I was on Twitter commenting on things that are happening in the country, like all the looting and the riots, etc. And I said some things that I'm fine with to this day, but Black Lives Matter saw it and didn't like it. So they descended upon the university, demanding I be fired. The president, who is so eager to show that he's not a racist, he's your white liberal who's just desperate to show he's not a racist. So he bends over backwards to kiss their feet. And so he launches an investigation into me, into my entire career at UCF, which is 22 years at UCF. Professor at University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley, for 4 years prior to coming to Florida. Anyway, of course, they went through everything and they couldn't really find much. And also they were doing massive solicitation of complaints on their websites through massive emails talking about, they condemn me, they condemn my tweets. My tweets are hurtful, offensive, vile, racist. They have no tolerance for racism.
Real quick, when you say solicitation of complaints, like you mean they were getting people to do this, or they were literally soliciting complaints against you?
After they would spend 75% of their time either in Twitter videos or in written word postings on their web postings, denouncing me and my comments, then they say, anyone has experienced any racial discrimination from any professor, please call this number. And you can even do so anonymously. So I've taught over 30,000 students at UCF, over 30,000 students. And about 300 people from different years came forward and started making these complaints that I said this in class, I said this in their class. And they most of them put a little twist on what I said to make it sound much more dramatic than what I said. Anyway, so long story short, they took all those complaints and tried to claim that I have created a hostile learning environment for my students for all these years that I've been getting outstanding in teaching. All these years I've gotten major teaching awards at UCF. They just didn't know there was this racist monster in the classroom. So they charged me with racial discrimination and gender discrimination and creating a hostile learning environment. And then they also cobbled together some other nonsense charges against me. So anyway, 6 months later, they fired me. And so I really do think they thought it was such a humiliating, devastating experience for me that they thought I would just go away. And like I said, luckily for me, I had resources because I've been around for so long and I've saved money. So as you may know already, I chose initially to tell my private attorney, Samantha Harris, to hit the pause button because she charges a normal fee, let's say. So I had the luxury of the union supplied me with an attorney, and it turns out he was really good. Really good. Not only is he really good, but he's anti-woke. It's rare because the union members tend to be woke. Mm-hmm. Even local on-campus union members never contacted me to offer support at all. I have to go to Tallahassee, where the main headquarters is for all the Florida campuses of the union, to get their help. Anyway, so it took a year and a half of doing nothing, living with uncertainty, living with no income. I applied to 20 schools just to see if I can get hired on somewhere else, got no response anywhere. And I was an active researcher. It's gonna be really hard for me to go back and pick up my research career. But I don't care, I only have 5 more years. Anyway, so 2 weeks ago, I got my job back and all back pay and all benefits. Supposedly UCF is going to try to transition me back into the classroom this August, this fall semester. And I do plan to sue them. I'm hoping before I go back to campus, I hope the lawsuit will have been filed.
Okay. Well, wow. Okay. I want to dive into all of that. But first I want to say thank you for standing up, because I believe in what I've seen, whether it's at OU and they do it with students and teachers, they do it. There has been this systemic across the country pattern of finding certain professors and making an example of them.
Yep. Yeah.
And it's basically say, do not tread here, right?
Mhm.
Do not do, and so it sets a precedent and shuts everyone else up, and then ripens them and tills the ground, if you will, for the rest of the faculty to say,
Yeah.
you don't want to end up like him.
That's right.
And I think a majority of the professors that have gone through that, although they may have filed stuff, and most of them have won it from what I've seen. There was one at OU in 2018, and that, but they settle. The university gets the big brouhaha in the press. They let a year breathe. They settle them out, but they've still ruined their career. And so I just applaud you for standing up and being a courageous individual. And I know your circumstances helped you with that, but there's no situation in which that is easy.
I know.
Never.
It's really hard.
Never. Okay. Well, Richard, I want to get you in on I want to just, if you give everybody a brief synopsis of your position, where you're at, and what your fight has been in regards to this down in Texas, UT Austin.
Yeah, so I'm an associate professor of finance at the Macomb School of Business at UT Austin, although I'm sure they don't want anyone to know that anymore. I sort of stumbled into this when I was on the tenure appeals committee and started seeing what was happening in some of the other departments. And because the business school is still a bit protected from this stuff, although we've started hiring our DEI people, we can't get, you mentioned these DEI statements. You cannot get a job as a business school dean anymore without expressing your love for DEI. You won't even get past the search firm. And I've talked to several people who just like, they're not even applying for dean jobs anymore. So it's coming for us, but I'm still a little separated. But I saw this sort of thing where, people were being denied promotion because the sign of their regression coefficient was the wrong one. And things that are supposed to be good turn out to be bad. And that means you can't get promoted. And then all these people whispering about the critical race theorists purging all the interdisciplinary departments of non-critical race theorists. And if that's happening, why are you sitting here in your little English professor office not being like, stop this? Because if we're purging all traditional inquiry and just going through this postmodern nonsense based stuff that I ran into in undergrad and like rolled my eyes like people are nuts, like 3 pages of Foucault and you can tell this is all garbage, and that's suddenly taking over everything else in the university. So I got a little worked up. They came after me a little bit, but it was sort of ham-handed and incompetent. I made some comment about they were claiming they needed to fire this guy because his teacher ratings were below department averages, even though they're above university averages and college averages. I made some comment to the effect of, so your criteria for your faculty is that they all have to be above the department average. And that led to accusations of racism, sexism, homophobia, blah, blah, blah. But my department chair is a finance professor and just sort of found that whole thing amusing, I think. So I don't actually have the sad story of people destroying my life yet. I'm sure they're trying, but I thought, was in a position to actually make a last stand and hold out a little bit. And so over the past few years, we've tried, we tried to set up, for example, we worked on a project to set up what came to be called the Liberty Institute, which was going to be a sort of a way to get traditional humanities and statistics and all of these things without having to go through the political training that's now required if you want to get a degree from the University of Texas. We're going to try to offer a different perspective. And by different, I mean 2015 perspective on this stuff. And then that's where they really went, the idea of anything like that ever being allowed to occur at a university got people very upset, and they fought us, and they stopped that from happening. So that's kind of where I've come to this. That's just become something, it's sort of fascinating to watch the institution. As a business school professor, I'm used to like studying the pathologies of businesses, where they have problems and all of this, and just kind of watching your own industry and your own institution just collapse and do such a horrible job of its core function. honestly, it's intellectually fascinating, just from the perspective of an economist, just watching all this. Like, how could a firm possibly be run this badly? How could they so move away from their mission of providing anything like education and research into this like lunatic activism stuff so quickly? And what are the incentives, and what's the kind of structure of the place that does this? And then you see it spilling out into other firms, and now this sort of ESG thing. So I'm like, oh, well, this thing that's ruining universities, now it's ruining the entire economy. So we should probably study it, figure it out, and maybe like consider doing something about it. So that's kind of where I'm coming from on this stuff. And but mostly, yeah, I mean, a disturbing amount of this stuff is really about just intellectual fascination with the collapse of the university system for me.
Well, that's and in my work here at OU, because I made a concerted effort in trying to get to the powers that be to say, hey, guess what? This is not, because what happened after CRT made it big, if I want to put that. So you had James Lindsay, then you had Chris Rufo that brought it to President Trump, right? President Trump bans it in the federal government, and all of a sudden it's prime time, right? And I had went to the governor 6 months before that and said, this will be the most important political issue, at least in 2022, if not 2020 and 2024, and however long it takes to get it out. But, and you kind of got the standard, yeah, nobody cares about education, nobody cares about any of that. And then sure enough,
specifically Republicans don't care about education.
Yes.
That's a big part of the problem.
Yes. And I saw that kind of switch once Trump banned it, and then you had Chris Rufo, kind of at the spear with James backing him up with all kinds of, and then everybody started to come out of the woodworks. But then the focus immediately went, which I think was good, rightfully so, to the K through 12 schools. And again, I'm sitting here going, guys, wait a minute. No. Who's teaching the teachers to do it? And that's where I came from, because it's like, if Republicans are supposed to be the pragmatic party, if conservatives are supposed to be the people that buckle down, look at the issues and solve the problem, free from any, bleeding heartness, if you want to put it that way. Why aren't you looking at the source? Why are we going towards the branch and not the root? And never could get an answer on that. And so I have some stuff I want to share, but before I share it, I want to get kind of what is happening on the ground from each of you at your universities, and what your state governments might be doing to check the universities themselves, because I believe that the problem stems there, at least in terms of education. Now, I think it goes further up into ESG, into finance, into all the things that fund it, including the NCAA, which I think is a big part of it. But I want to, since we're all, this is university focused, I want to focus at what is being done by the state governments in your states to stem the tide, specifically at the university level. Charles?
Okay, so I'm not the best person to represent DeSantis or the Florida government, because although I certainly watch the news and pay attention to stories, it's not my area. So one thing, DeSantis has passed a bill, or I don't know, it might have been an executive order, the parental rights bill. Now, what he has done in that bill, which his critics have renamed it "Don't Say Gay" bill, it's making it illegal for kindergarten through third grade, just kindergarten through third grade teachers to be talking to the students about sex or sexual orientation or gender identity and transgenderism. Now, the critics and even people like Disney, who has come out against DeSantis's bill, will say, which I think understand, that there are kids, little kids, kindergarten, first grade, and second graders, who have gay parents. sometimes same-sex parents who are married. And their concern is the idea the teacher can never acknowledge that little Susie has two dads or two moms or whatever. And for someone like myself, remember I have a husband myself, that's not the issue. A teacher could probably acknowledge, you know, oh, Susie, I see your two moms are here to pick you up, whatever. And the kids won't even make much of that. Is some of these teachers are activists, want to give lessons and do little exercises that promote transgenderism and the preferred pronoun thing, and tell little boys that just because you have a penis doesn't make you a boy. You can be a girl too, and you can try anytime you want. And they want to do that with kindergartners up to 3rd grade. So the majority of Floridians, and I think there are surveys, national surveys, that show that the majority of Americans support that bill, the parental rights bill. But there's a sizable percent of people in Florida, like I said, even Disney, the head of the corporation of Disney, who opposed it. So, and of course now it's gotten very messed up because DeSantis, just to let you know really quickly, and again, I'm not the best person to articulate, but Disney owns lots of property in Central Florida, and they kind of have their own government, so to speak.
Right.
And so
they were kind of autonomous.
Yeah, and DeSantis has probably made the mistake, but that's my tentative opinion, and saying, well, if you're going to become outspoken against my bill, I'm going to punish you. He didn't say punish them, but he's going to take away their privileges. Yeah. So now that's getting into, he's retaliating against them for their free speech, which is a legitimate criticism. You know, Disney has a right, just like everyone does, to criticize any political bill or
sure.
And then if the government comes after you by trying to penalize you, it doesn't look good. So that's one issue. And then the other is he has passed a law through, I think, executive order. It's called the Individual Freedom Bill, if I'm not mistaken. And some of the provisions of that bill is that even at universities, it's prohibited for people to like scapegoat one racial group and blame them for all the problems in the world, etc. And it's written along those lines. So it doesn't say, you know, you cannot keep blaming whites for the shortcomings of other minority groups.
Right.
But it just says you can't scapegoat any racial group for the social problems or etc.
Okay. So in specific to that bill then, because Oklahoma has kind of the same thing, but the Constitution, or they say the Constitution, you know, limits what the legislature and the state government can do with the university. I don't buy that completely, but I think that that's a bit of, but have you noticed anything change? And I know you haven't been on the university campus in a while,
that's right.
But if you've been watching, has DEI been stemmed by any of that at all?
So you're correct. I've been away for a year and a half. So I just get little bits of pieces of information. I know the local union people who are totally woke at UCF. I mean, the head of the local union, who's a professor of history, has a Karl Marx poster in his office, to give you some idea. Anyway, they held a special meeting to try to clarify for the faculty, in light of this new bill, what they can or cannot say. And I've gathered from what I've read where he's telling the professors they have academic freedom, which is freedom of speech, and they can say what they want. So I don't know what the status is, and you better believe I'll find out when I get
Yeah, you will.
Once I start saying all the things that I say in my classes, I'll find out to what extent anything has changed or not. But I need to slip in one more thing here. It's really important.
Yes.
Okay, so there's an organization called Speech First. Speech First. it's a conservative organization. I don't know who funds them, but they go around suing universities, including UT Austin, where Richard's at, to put the brakes on what is generically called a bias response team, which is there, and different universities have different names for it.
Mhm.
The generic term is bias response team. And so that's a little system that's set up like communist Cuba, where on every street, a house is designated. I'm talking about Cuba right now. A house is designated with a sign in front of it. I've been to Cuba that says this house represents the defense of the Committee of the Revolution or whatever, and the purpose is to report on any neighbors who's doing anything that they think is subversive to the government. And of course, fears that family, because if they don't simply like you,
yeah,
they claim something, and once the authorities start investigating you, you never know what's going to happen. So these bias response teams, Speech First has been successful in causing some type of change to those that UT Austin, University of Michigan, and so they sued UCF. They sued UCF the month I got fired, so a year and a half ago, for two reasons. One is UCF has a bias response team. They're claiming, Speech First is claiming it chills free speech. If students and professors are afraid to say anything that's going to offend someone, because the person who's offended is going to drop a dime. That's an outdated reference, I know.
No.
Call the Office of Diversity and report them. And then the other thing Speech First sued UCF for was, with the new president that came in, he implemented a harassment/discrimination policy. And which, harassment is illegal, discrimination is illegal, but the way it's worded is that anything that offends anyone who belongs to a protected class constitutes having engaged in harassment and discrimination.
Impact over intent.
What's that?
Impact over intent. Yes.
So anyway, Speech First sued UCF over that. And the initial district federal judge thought the policy was sufficiently constrained and said it's fine, but Speech First appealed to the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, a 3-panel group of judges who said, oh no. This is very problematic. It's causing people, students, professors, to be afraid to say anything because they're going to be accused of harassment and discrimination and have to deal with that. So 3 days before the UCF attorneys working against me, and 3 days before my union attorney had to turn in their written briefs or closing arguments to the arbitrator, the 11th Circuit Court came out with a ruling saying UCF must stop applying that harassment discrimination policy because it violates people's First Amendment rights. So I think that's going to be in my favor.
Well, in the favor of the students and free speech and
yeah,
on
but
campus.
Curiously, UCF has not announced to anyone that they just lost that lawsuit to Speech First.
Well, that's not curious at all. Again, that is part of this mirage, and I call these incidents. Ours is called BERT, the Black Emergency Response Team, but it also is weaponized throughout DEI because you have committees in every college, led by deans in every college, DEI deans in every college, that their only job is to find racism or find discrimination, and as a measure of removing people from in the institution. I call it ethnocentric viewpoint cleansing. It's not really about your race or gender. They want to find out whether you agree.
Yeah, that's right.
And they'll use your race or gender to do that. And that's the cudgel or the pry that they use to get it out. So it's very much in line. I'm glad that the Circuit Court did that. I think that's going to give all of us and all of the universities some semblance of a tool to go back, and especially with you now as you're going to get what you're owed. Richard, what are you seeing in that vein in terms of the state government and how it's intersecting, for lack of a better term, with the with UT Austin and the University system in Texas.
Well, so what you see kind of is there's kind of two parallel tracks. There's the government bureaucracy within the university, and then there's the state government. And the way things have historically worked is the state government writes large checks and does nothing else. And the government bureaucracy within the universities, such as your deans and all that, just do whatever they want. And this has been going on for decades. It's a terrible system, unconditional. Forget woke it, forget all of that. Like this idea is like, let's write a check to bureaucrats and let's just assume they'll do the right thing. But let's make sure we select bureaucrats through a process that gets the sort of most self-interested and lazy people possible. And then let's put them in powerful positions and write giant checks to them and pretend that we have no role in oversight. So there's been zero oversight there. And what this has turned into, apart from just lazy people feathering their nests, which has been going on for decades, is you have this bureaucracy that has been relentlessly pushing to lock down speech at universities. So we had our bias response team, and that got slapped down. I mean, I believe it was Edith Jones at the circuit court over here, Fifth, just wrote it's great opinion. It's like, what the hell are you thinking? This is obviously, you can't set up a snitch line. And so, but of course, what do? Is like, okay, well, we're going to do the absolute minimum and we're going to tweak it slightly. And we're going to promise we're not going to punish anybody for anything that gets reported on the snitch line. But of course, we'll record it and blah, blah, blah. And then, once, we need to go back to everyone's, so that they rebuild the snitch line. They put in this diversity, equity, and inclusion policy where inclusion, I think we've alluded to this, it specifically means you cannot offend, your research and your teaching cannot offend marginalized groups, regardless of whether it's true or false. So we have a policy, it's up at the president approved it, everyone's happy about this. It says everybody has to commit to diversity, equity, and inclusion with this particular meaning. And this keeps going. The president's been promoting more and more critical race theorists to the highest, to the tenure committee. And so now 2 of our people on the university level tenure committee, which is only 5 or 6 people, are critical race theorists, one of whom apparently was said explicitly at some point that Republicans should not be allowed on to teach at the university. So we're getting more and more of this lockdown, more formal policies. The business school is getting their diversity, equity, and inclusion deans, and all of these people are very clear that it's not, it's very clearly about making sure that this set of ideas are not represented. We got a astronomy professor had to withdraw a paper in a book because he was trying to do objective measures of early career success to see how it predicts late career success. And because this might not show that you should be hiring and tenuring more people from these marginalized groups, in this case, women, he had to withdraw his paper and book. And this is the level we're at now internally. And then externally, finally, some of the people in the state government looked over at UT and were like, wait, what? Maybe this stuff shouldn't go on, and started saying, maybe we need to take a look at some things here. And then immediately the university explodes and the press explodes about how the state government is attacking academic freedom because they're criticizing critical race theory and all of that. Meanwhile, our attempt to present diverse ideas, literally diverse ideas that are no longer represented, gets shot down by the faculty. We have a policy saying you can't say anything you want. We have a snitch line, and all these people are all worked up because the lieutenant governor had one press conference where he said, hey, maybe we should do something other than critical race theory at a university for once. So, it's insane. The only efforts to rein in this activist group, and it's bad enough that the university has been taken over by activists, but activists who specifically want to destroy the mission of the university to seek truth. As soon as anybody starts pushing back a little bit, everybody's up in arms. And you even talk to Republicans, they're like, oh no, we don't want to interfere with their academic freedom. There's no academic freedom here to interfere with. You can't say what you want and get a job or promote it. They initially wanted a diversity, equity, and inclusion statement for every single job at the university. And this got leaked, and some organizations said, well, that may not be okay. And they dialed back, but you have to take into account, every single job at the university has to take into account how much you care about diversity, equity, and inclusion in their terms. And then they're saying like the lieutenant governor is going to mess up academic freedom. You've set up a political filter. There's no academic freedom, but and the lieutenant governor, he's in like the state government is inscrutable to me. But they're saying things like ending tenure and doing these sorts of things, and who knows if he's going to follow through on anything. But that's where we are, and there's this ridiculous tension between the university is destroying academic freedom, the state might try to restore some of it, and everyone's angry at the state for going after the people who've crushed academic freedom and free speech at the university. It's sort of ridiculous.
And that I talk about preemptive narratives. And I think the left uses this a lot. And this is a perfect example of that, where it's, okay, they accuse you that of which they are doing. I mean, that's a standard, it's not to use the word because this will be on YouTube, but the old German view of propaganda, okay? And that they're going to accuse you that of which they are doing. And this is part of what I want to get in with Charles here in a minute, is kind of the psychological nature of this whole thing, since you are a psychologist. But it's, they come in and say their whole mode of operation is to remove your ability to speak and teach and discuss ideas, to talk about the controversial things. And then when you or the state government comes in and says, okay, well, we noticed this needs to change, they say, well, you're preventing academic freedom. They do the same thing with books. And this is something I just wrote down when you were talking. It's like they say, okay, well, if we want to remove genderqueer from schools, which is pornography, okay, it's blatant pornography, then that you're a book burner, you're a McCarthyite book burner. And I want to touch on something in relation to that, because as Richard just said, they're banning books before they're written. They're banning papers before they're written. So they may not be taking the physical copy of the book and throwing it in a fire, or in the digital fire by getting it taken down off of Amazon or whatever it may be, or taking it out.
They did in Canada, by the way. There was an actual book burning. So
yes, yeah. Well, in Canada is America in 20 years if we don't deal with the problem. And going back to what Charles had said, Charles expressed some concern for me, and I really appreciate that, because I am not a tenured professor. I've not gotten a job. I have ABD on my doctorate and still trying to finish my document. But we are in a rapidly closing window of opportunity, that if we don't have a concerted effort of people at all levels, but especially tenured faculty, who will stand up and go, no, I don't care what this does to my reputation. This has to stop, or it will destroy your discipline. That's what it's designed to do. But they burn the books before they're written. They burn the speech before anyone gets to complain about the lack of free speech. And that's what I mean in terms of a preemptive narrative. Another example is Jim Crow 2.0. Or one, how they threw that out. It's like, well, anti-racism, which is, Kendi defines it explicitly in terms of public policy or institutional policy. Either you support policies that create equity, which the only way to create equity is through discrimination on the front end. It's the only way to create it. He says that, and we all know the quote, and from How to Be an Anti-Racist, and that is literally Jim Crow 1.0. And so when you say, then when in Florida, when they say, well, maybe we should have voter ID, you got to have ID to, get a lot, to do almost anything else, then they throw out the Jim Crow 2.0 as a preemptive strike of saying, now you can't come back at us. Now you can't come back at us and say that what we're doing is actually Jim Crow 1.0 institutional policy-based racism and racial discrimination or gender discrimination or viewpoint discrimination. And so I just wanted to highlight that, because that is what is happening for the audience. I'm in Oklahoma. Richard is in Texas. Charles is in Florida. Okay. And everyone is focusing on the blue states right now. And I think rightfully so, there needs to be focus there, because if we don't, they're talking about, they're almost gone, if not gone already in a lot of cases. But the left is not focusing on the blue states. The left and the woke left are focusing on the red states, and they are doing it. They're setting up their bases within these bastions of Republican, ruby redness. Maybe Florida was purple for a while, was pretty red now, but they're doing that in the university towns. And this is what I was talking about earlier, that they start with the university and they get the town around it so you can have a nice blue moat right around the town. And then the whole thing is then designed to spread. And the other part of this is that the federal government is supporting this through the Department of Transportation, through the CARES Act funding, through block grants, because you will get money to do development. The one example of this is low-cost housing. You see this right now in Norman, Oklahoma, where the Republicans, even the ones who came out most against to fund the police, have created this strange alliance with the university to say, hey, and the city government, it's like this, you got the developers who are going to build things, you got the city government, and then you got the university, which is the biggest presence in the city. And they do this little collusion thing and they go, we'll support and help you get through ESG funded grants, through the federal government, money to build low cost housing developments. And immediately all the homeless start just flooding. I live in Norman, Oklahoma. We get everyone's weather leftovers, okay? It's not San Francisco. It's not warm. It will be 70 degrees one day and 10 degrees the next. It is not a hospitable place for a homeless person to live. But after defund the police and after the DEI change, immediately in the response to that, we had this giant they just came in. And it started to be a real problem. And so then mayoral candidates started running on fixing the homeless problem. And if you follow Chris Rufo's work before he started on CRT, he talked about San Francisco, Portland, and these places trying to build their way out of homelessness. And all that did, many of those places are empty. The people are still living on the streets. There's still being the enforcement to try to move them is gone. And I think Austin is maybe starting to kind of turn the corner on this where they're enforcing it a little bit more, but they went down this road as well. And the Republican response from and I will use this term, the 1995, 1985 Reagan Bush Republicans is a rising tide lifts all ships. If we make a lot of money building low cost housing developments, everybody's going to benefit from that. No, they're trying to change the electorate of your city. So you got the moat, and then the moat is designed to spread. And that's exactly what's happening in Columbia, Missouri too. And so I want, before we move on from this, everyone to understand that college towns and the universities are the castles and the moats are the cities, and the moats designed to spread. And if we don't do something, really do something about the state government injecting itself a little bit into the universities and regulating this, it will spread. It was 1980, 1984, and 1988 that Republicans were winning in California. Something happened from 92 to present day. And this was it. This was it. And the Republicans here, and this last time, and I want to move on because I know Charles has to go, because I really want to get into the psychology of DEI a little bit. But I want just maybe 2 or 3 minutes apiece to talk about what you're seeing in your towns, specifically along the lines of what I just kind of described. If you're seeing that, if you're not, that's fine, but it's just what you're seeing, Charles.
Your question is about Orlando?
Yeah, well, because UCF's in Orlando. Do you see, first of all, you may not be paying attention, but how is the city government and how is the city, is it as woke and as leftist as the university? Is it going that direction? Do you see a lot of activism in the city itself?
Okay, so I'm going to express some things here that may or may not make sense. So let's start with, there's a center, a political center, and then there's people on the left side of that center who we might call liberal, and on the right side we might call conservative. So I'm of the opinion that there's nothing wrong with having that range of people. I would argue we need to have that range of people because we're looking at it from the US point of view in terms of we only have two parties. You know, we've all been socialized to believe that we can only have two parties, unlike other countries that have more than two parties, but we've been brought up all our lives thinking that we can only have two parties. So I'm an independent. I'm not a Republican.
Me too.
I think we need to have Democrats as well as Republicans.
Mhm.
Why? Because let's just say if Republicans, conservatives / Republicans were to start winning everything and there's no one pushing back on them, they start drifting more and more to the extreme and nut jobs on the right. And we need to have someone on the left to be keeping them back, heading towards the center. That's my opinion.
Mhm.
So I'm not opposed to liberal people. In fact, I used to think of myself as a classical liberal person, like say Bill Maher now is coming out pretty much. He's anti-woke pretty much, even though he's always been considered a liberal.
Mhm.
So I think the problem is the left has become hijacked by extreme activist people. You're asking me to kind of get into the psychology of this, and if you don't mind me going ahead and diving in.
Yeah, go ahead. Let's dive in.
So I think there's a confluence of factors happening that's causing this nonsense to be so phenomenal, so potent right now. That's the word I'm looking for. It's so potent right now. We're talking about DEI. So you have, I'm going to call them white liberals / progressives who, they had the want to save the world mentality, which in some ways has its merits, to care about other people. But when it's done out of neurotic, dysfunctional reasons, like out of guilt, like white guilt, that's when you're doing something for the wrong reasons. And when you do things for the wrong reasons, things can go awry. So you got this group of people who are, in my opinion, everything I'm saying right now is my opinion, who are really to the left. Some people have called them self-loathing whites. They don't like themselves. They're ashamed of Western culture. They're ashamed of the fact that, Europeans and people of descendants of Europe pretty much created the entire modern world. Notice I said modern world. They feel guilty over that and ashamed, which is bizarre because other groups, if they had done that, they'd be quite boastful of it. And so we have that group who I consider them to be pretty dysfunctional, far left, self-loathing people. And then you have these militant people who belong to minority groups. Not all Blacks, it's not all Hispanics, but there are people, and enough of them, within those two groups, Blacks and Hispanics, who resent the fact that their group has not been the group that has created the modern world. Their groups are not the ones that dominate in the United States. And they kind of suffer envy. That's my opinion, my psychological opinion. And so they have found, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, so to speak. They have found an alliance. The militants among Blacks and Hispanics who would love to dominate society. They'll say they want equality. It's like radical feminists. Radical feminists, they're just fighting for equality when you look at what they're actually fighting for, it looks like they want to dominate. They don't want to just achieve equality. But that's everything I'm saying right now is my opinion. So this militant faction within Blacks and Hispanics are joining hands with this dysfunctional, self-loathing, guilt-ridden group of whites to try to abolish Western culture. That's the way I see it. And ever since starting probably with Michael Brown, seems like it's been escalating from that incident on, and of course it came to a head with George Floyd. They're emboldened and they've joined forces. And if anyone gets in there, and then they get trans activists who wanting to impose things that are clearly not in the interest of just achieving equality, like forcing the rest of us to acknowledge our pronouns. How about you, the trans person, just call yourself what you want to be called, and maybe we'll respect that. But yes, you're not satisfied with that. You want us to also change our language. You want us to, we have 2 bathrooms, male and female, men and women bathrooms. Pick one. Pick one that you think you can feel most comfortable with and use it and shut the F up. But no. You want everyone, Sears, Macy's, Walmart, Kroger's if you're in Texas, and Publix in Florida, to spend tens of thousands of dollars to remodel your buildings to create a bathroom that's called a gender neutral bathroom, which is not really necessary, but it's like they're going to impose their will on everyone else. So we multiple people, militant minorities, trans activists, self-loathing, hardcore progressive whites who hate capitalism supposedly, which is a max. They're coming together, and if anyone who stands in their way, they've learned to weaponize the words racist, transphobe, homophobe, misogynist, every word that biatch Hillary Clinton rattled off to describe half of America on that little speech she gave once, as we see every now and then, a basket of deplorables speech that she gave. So all those little buzzwords, you start calling those things to people in their faces. Professionals get intimidated by that. I mean, there's no, let's stay close to a university here. There's no professor who wants to be labeled a racist or a transphobe. I mean, they'll do anything to avoid that.
Yeah.
And so even people who are maybe reasonable people who may not be pro DEI, they will crap in their pants if these activists start going after them and labeling them as racist and having the power of the institution support them.
Well,
so,
yeah. Well, and I want to get into that because first of all, I mean, I think I'm an independent. I view myself as a classical liberal into a conservative. Like I have conservative leanings, but I think all of those monikers right now are pretty much becoming useless because you are seeing this kind of political realignment. So, but a question I would say is, and maybe Richard can address this a little bit too from his point of view, is that what good is a Democratic Party in terms of an opposition that has been so overtaken? Because it used to have blue dog Democrats, right? I think of Evan Bayh, and you had those kind of blue dog Democrats that would be somewhere towards the middle. I don't see them anymore. And it seems the entirety of the whole Democratic Party votes in one lockstep on most issues now. And they're all these social issues that you're describing designed to wedge Americans against Americans. You can't be a United States if you can't unite it under a flag or under a general ethos of, freedom, democracy, being a republic, and all the things that has made America progress over the last 250 years. It seems the left and the Democratic Party has largely abandoned those things in favor of an equity message saying that, down to the point of saying, diversity is our strength. Well, what happened to e pluribus unum, which is basically the same thing, out of many one? They don't want the one, they just want the separation. And I know that I'm not discounting that there are crackpots on the right, okay? But they do not have the institutions. The crackpots on the right do not have the institutions. They do not have the universities. They do not have businesses like Disney, Google, and Amazon. None of them, because we've so pejorativized necessarily the far right in this country to the point that you see people having to create that kind of violence, when you're talking about Jesse Smollett or things like that. I'm not saying it does not happen, it does, but the Summer of Love was a much longer event then even, you know, regardless of what you think about January 6th, what happened at January 6th, you know, and the left has taken that and weaponized it towards the group of people they see as the threat. So in response, and I want to give Richard a chance to jump in on this, because I think it's, I value your opinion, Charles, because one, you just said you're a gay man and you have a husband, and you, but also see that the L, G, and the B doesn't necessarily align with the T and the Q in terms of their social goals, right? And what they want other people to do, you know, and that's where I think you see this political realignment. Richard, are you going to jump in on this?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think in Texas specifically, I think, you know, you see some of this at universities where, you know, it can't be it can't be the case that every single person here is a lunatic, right? Like, if you're capable of doing physics, maybe physics is a bad example, but like, you know, if you're a competent linguist, you shouldn't be a lunatic, but you have to go along because of this fear. And then once you're sort of on the political left, traditionally, you know, it may be that some of these people are still perfectly reasonable and they're just going along out of fear of getting tarred. I mean, what you may be seeing in Texas a bit is a bit of a realignment where, you know, there's sort of core of economically very left, but culturally very centrist Democrats down in the, well, you were in the Rio Grande Valley, right, Charles? Right.
Many years ago.
Yeah, but that's not a enormously woke part of Texas, but it, you know, has traditionally been very heavily voted for Democrats, and we're seeing a realignment there where some of the people down there are like, that's not, so this, you know, to your point about the realignment, and then, you know, tying that into what you were talking about, local government, you know, the flip response about localities is sort of, well, Austin didn't need any help being crazy, right? Like,
right.
That's sort of been the reputation. But what I have seen sort of systematically is it used to be this great place where all these like bizarre and interesting people who could have never functioned in like small town Texas
or Norman, Oklahoma.
Yeah, right. It would have been way too confining. They came to Austin. They were very creative, made interesting things, did interesting stuff, lots of great music if you're into that type of music. And it was sort of, and then it was, you know, the term I use was like Berkeley if there were grownups in charge, because the state was always kind of watching over. You just couldn't do.
Yeah.
You couldn't go too far.
It's the capital city.
Right.
Yeah.
And you had this tension of this conservative state watching over this kind of very free and open. Because again, that sort of shifted, and now, you know, this more university-based intolerant wokeism has kind of grown out, as you said, and then like the city government, you know, now we've got state, you know, our city council people who are like very highly educated and completely nuts, kind of bringing that intolerant left, if it's even, I don't even think it belongs on that spectrum, in, and that's where you get these sort of very aggressive attempts to promote homelessness and all of that. And, you know, and it's that exact same thing of like, oh, how dare you question us? You know, 20 years ago, the Austin City Council was full of quirky, weird people, but they're not going to try to, like, they're not going to accuse you of being a racist if you try to do something about homelessness. But now we've got that attitude. Besides, this is a sort of university city disconnect. We did some events, online events about the homeless problem here, because it, you know, they promoted it, it got worse, and we got these very hostile responses from people at the university about how horribly racist we were to discuss homelessness and issues around homelessness in Austin as, you know, non-minorities at the university. I said, well, first of all, the guy leading it was Carlos Carvalho, a clearly not Native American, not native of the United States, and I guess Hispanic, depending on how you count Brazilians. And then if you like audited your average bridge encampment in Austin, the people looked a lot more like me than anyone else. So that, you know, it is that, you know, that intolerant default to this, you know, everything is racist, even if that's irrelevant thing, has sort of spread to the way we're thinking about problems in Austin. And it's an issue, and the state every once in a while pays enough attention to do things, but, you know, it's not going in the right direction, I don't think.
Yeah. Well, and I
Other
first
than
of all,
that, recently it's improved a
yeah,
little bit, but we'll
yeah.
see.
Well, and that's the thing. I think there is a bit of a turn happening because people, I think it largely is because of the economy at this point, because the normal people even, and I think Richard was talking about this earlier, Republicans and conservatives do not support their activists. You know what I mean? There's not an institutional support for people necessarily that you can find them. And I think, Charles, you've had some support with your union, but that's not a Republican institution. That's not a right institution, or even in it's classically left, classically liberal institution is a union. And thank the Lord that they were there for you, you know, and
The attorney specifically, not
yeah,
the union. The union happened to pick a labor attorney who happened to be a non-woke person.
right. Well,
So
classical.
we get support by chance.
Yes, yes, and that I think is a huge part of this, because there is this bleed right now. This is what I don't think people in red states understand, is that there is a large portion of the establishment, and this goes into what Charles was saying, that if you don't have a check and balance, Oklahoma's red, has been since 1995. Before that, it was blue, blue, blue. But here's the thing. A lot of the people that were blue, blue, blue in 91 and in 92 and 89 and are still in power right now. And they just switch their color, you know, but they operate as a monolith of unchecked republicanism, you know, whatever you want to call establishment republicanism. Okay. And I'm not talking about even social issues right now, but it's the rising tide lifts all ships people. It's the, you know, economics first people that, you know, we'd have to not regulate businesses at all, no matter what they do. And this goes into also what Charles said, you know, about Disney. People are not corporations, and corporations are not people. Okay, corporations have excised power over people and when it comes to social issues, in the way that our universities have had over us. Because if they go for something that is, even if will stifle speech, or will make you or compel your own speech to say you have to agree with this, now you have the opportunity to work for them or not. Yes, I agree with that. And there's a line there. But there's also a contract with the state and what it is that they have in, if the government can give it, the government can take it away. And that's my thing with it. It's like, keep them out. But when you have companies like Google, for example, coming into Oklahoma that just dropped $75 million, right? And then simulcast that with school choice. And I'm choosing to be agnostic on school choice. I have issues, but this is my main issue, is that Google is a predominantly woke institution. They do diversity, equity, and inclusion. They gather your data. They put all of your people out. They put surveys out through school institutions and gather that data. And where is it going? Well, if they want a grant for something, it's going straight to the federal government. I'll tell you that right now, because the government demands community data now. That's what part of what I'm uncovering. They're gathering community data in order to get major block grants from the federal government, which has, under the Biden administration at least, is pushing a DEI agenda. And that's the danger here, is that we don't see that blue and red especially in places like Oklahoma that do not have the check that Charles was talking about. They don't have the sizable democratic check. They're taking over the economic conservatives, the Reagan era conservatives, by saying, hey, we're going to bring big business into your state. We're going to bring Amazon. We're going to bring Google. We're going to bring, you know, all of that and all of the economic development and benefit that comes with it, Republicans. But guess what? We're going to data mine your children. And when you go to school choice, we're going to put people on those boards. What happens then? You know, and so that, I think there are blind spots in red states, is what I'm trying to say, that people in power now who have that kind of old Republican mindset of business and economic first, And I sound like right now, I sound like a classical Democrat saying we need to regulate business. You know what? I'm not. I lean more right than I ever did, left. But there's a point where the government has a responsibility to protect the free speech and values of its electorate, especially
But
state and
I
local.
think we would, Charles and I would point out that you might as well start doing that with the institutions you directly control. Like if they're not even going to, force the universities to live up to those principles, what are the chances that they're going to,
And I
successfully
would point all of that back right there, because, and that's where I really wanted to focus was, if the government won't regulate their higher ed institutions to say you cannot stifle speech.
Yeah.
What do we do? If they won't protect people like Charles in the outset, and what do we do? Because every teacher that comes out and has come out of the university, I've been in college preparing to teach since 2003. And I've been in that a majority of the time. And I watched this turn. I've watched it, and every teacher that comes out, every administrator that comes out of colleges of education is going to carry this into every K through 12 school they go into, because they're required to. That's my main issue with DEI at the university level. So I want to get a couple of thoughts. I want to get both of your thoughts on ways that you believe that we can really start to stem the tides specifically in the universities. Because Richard and I have tried some things. Charles is going the legal route and doing some lawfare. We've went after the Board of Regents. We've led a campaign. Tried to lead a campaign against the president who's institutionalizing all of it. Crickets. What do we do? What do you think, Charles?
Well, ordinarily, I would say that only one route I think would give us any hope is lawsuits. But to have heard you say that after UT Austin lost their lawsuit from Speech First, and they simply repackaged their bias response team, that's really disappointing to me to hear. I'm sorry.
Oh, I was going to jump at you, and I think that to me highlights one of the important things is like you've got to have people willing to follow through. It's like, oops, we were violating free speech. Well, wouldn't it be nice if we had a president who actually liked free speech and was like, instead of trying to work around that lawsuit, I'll use that to do the right thing. And to some extent, like if you could get good university leadership, a lot of these problems would kind of unravel fairly quickly. That's my view. You might. Do you think a good president at UCF might be able to turn the ship around a little bit?
The question is, are there any good presidents left? That's one question.
Mm-hmm.
The other is, if we were to have a quote unquote good president who liked traditional liberty types of values, they're going to be walking into a snake pit. So yes, it's true. There are professors who probably are not into DEI and woke, and if they could, they would express themselves. But there are many professors, I know them, they're in my department, psychology, who are happy I got fired. And they're probably having pity parties right now over the fact that I got my job back. So if there were such a good thing as a good president, she or he would be walking into a snake pit. And, go ahead.
Oh yeah, and that's an interesting point. If you understand the process through which you become a college president, like to even be considered, you have got to have been a department chair and a dean and like maybe a provost somewhere. And all of those processes are designed, there are these faculty advisory committees that have a lot of influence, and there are these search firms that are very, very woke. And so even to be in the set of people that you would naturally consider for a college president, you've already shown yourself to be at best a weasel. Like the best possible person you can get as a college president is a weasel, because it's either going to be a weasel or an ideologue.
Mhm.
And,
And
you know,
and
you
I'm gonna
particularly
build
get
out-
these,
Oh, I'm sorry.
you particularly get these people who are really good at lying to conservatives in certain, so like it's a specialty of like, can I be an ideological weasel
Mhm.
for the left while also constantly successfully lying to Republicans? And it's amazing. Like, it's like a 7-figure job to lie to Republicans. It's
Yep.
amazing.
Yep.
But you know, that we probably got to look outside of the pool of people you think of as qualified to be college presidents. Like, for
Agreed.
example, you could just pick a random person off the street and you'd probably do better. But anyway.
So I was going to say that's one angle from which we are swimming up a creek, which is looking at leadership. But the other is coming from students themselves.
Yeah.
I've noticed before I got fired over the last 5 years of a trend of students coming in my classes who they only have but I say this with no disrespect, they only have a high school diploma, which
Yeah.
doesn't say much from a US high school. And yet, in the last 5 years, I've noticed they're coming in with such strong opinions about social issues. And they're so confident that their points of view are the correct ones. You know, we're on the right side of history sense. So I don't think just having a president come in who's going to try to restore the traditional purpose of the university is going to fix this situation in and of itself, because it's also coming from the bottom too.
Yeah. Well, and that's such a great point, because if you look at Mao's Cultural Revolution, that's what's happening right now. You know, we have teachers in Oklahoma leading walkouts of class over the abortion issue. You know what I mean? And all of these teachers were trained at a college of education to do this.
Sure.
Because critical race theory, critical gender theory, it has a praxis component. That praxis component is activism, and that's if you want to call it a religion too, that's the tithe. You know, you must go forth and preach the gospel, so to speak, and that goes to my point. But I just want to, since you hit on this, we had a university president here for 8 months that was hired, that was done like Richard said. He was plucked out as a CEO of an energy company. He was a manager. He was a budget cutter, and he was a no nonsense guy. And what happened is that he got dropped in right in the middle of the critical term. I mean, right before it just started, and he started cutting all of the unnecessary positions, you know, in the administration that the former president had brought up. He started cutting unnecessary positions in the international studies department and deanships and things like that, because the university was in trouble. And immediately you had this very small subset, but very loud group of student activists who I think were led by the president that we now have, because he was waiting for all of this. And the small group of sociologists, professors, and you know, our critical studies department, and when I say critical studies, I mean the woke way, you know, and they staged, you know, demonstrations over, you know, somebody saw a student walking through the middle of campus on blackface with blackface on. Nobody found the student, nobody got a picture, and nobody could figure it out. But it was this manufactured outrage. And then there were a couple of other things of stupid kids saying stupid things, because that's what drunk, stupid kids do, right? And using that, and they ran him off in 8 months. And the Board of Regents here at the University of Oklahoma just abandoned him. And right comes in this president, and the first thing he says, we need DEI. He wanted to be, just like you said about UCF, he wanted, and they had just carved out this giant administrative hole for them to just place it right into. That's what the president before them did.
And that's what these regents and the state, they seem to react very negatively to any sort of noise and disruption at the university. They just want it quiet. So whoever keeps the faculty quiet and the students quiet, they like, even though they're doing the exact opposite of what in a state like Oklahoma or Texas or even Florida, you would think the government wants. This lust for like the quiet, calm campus where we don't know what's going on seems to create an issue. Even getting people, like, the last thing that the regents want is to bring in someone who will cause trouble, but the only, you know, doing sensible things will inherently cause trouble at a university, and that's it's kind of a bind, right?
Yes, well, and in a place like Oklahoma, I believe it's directly because of the NCAA and the conferences relating to football, especially. I sat in front of 3 upper brass, my first meeting with OU, and they said to me, we're doing this because of the athletic department. The students in the athletic department want this, and they pay the bills. And then immediately, the next thing that Joe Haraz does after instituting DEI is they all work with UT and everybody's moving to the SEC, which is the exact same thing that Missouri did.
Mhm.
You know, they're following the same playbook, you know, and it's to get people to understand. Go ahead.
There's one more angle.
Yes, sir.
This is a beast with multiple prongs.
Hydra.
Accreditation agencies.
Yes. Yes.
So they're effed up over this DEI crap, and they have a lot of power because every program within the university needs to be accredited for its status and benefit of the students.
And I think there's even federal money, like there's a role of accreditation in how federal money flows, which gives you sort of accreditation gets government power without government oversight, which is, you know, it's how do you unravel all this stuff without just, I mean, we kind of need some sort of Gordian knot cutting here, it seems like.
And Republicans don't do that, by the way. You know what I mean? Like they just don't. Go ahead, Trump.
Well, I'm about to depart in a moment, and my departing words are, I'm not optimistic. I'm not optimistic. There are people saying, oh, they think the tide is turning, you know, because some parents are finally waking up in K through 12, and oh, I just don't see it. I don't. But.
My departing comment would be, you know, people are getting upset, but you know, it's so deep, it's so intertwined. It's not something you just realize is bad and vote away. Yeah,
and so. That goes into the opposite point of what I said. It's the economy, stupid. You know, when everybody can't pay, you know, for their trip to work and back because gas is so expensive, this stuff will all take a back seat. And I think that's part of the reason you see the Biden administration seeming to actively make this worse. You know, it's like it takes all the fire off of where the eyes need to go. And I'm not saying that as a Democrat, I'm a registered independent, but I said this on Twitter yesterday. This isn't about today. This is about 20 years from now. Because
you know, I think it's about 5 years from now.
Yeah.
I don't think in 20 years we're going to see, oh my God, we're screwed. I think 5 years from now, we might be saying, oh my God, we're screwed.
Yeah.
Well, and on that note,
I told you I'm not optimistic.
Yeah. Well, I will say this, gentlemen. First of all, thank you for coming on my show, and thank you as tenured professors for being 2 of the only people I have seen stand up publicly when your backs were to the wall, because it's been disheartening for me to be to give you my pessimism, to have my professors who I looked up to, that I thought were, and I think are in many ways, but that just back down in the face of any type of struggle when they know. I can see it in their eyes. I've seen it in their teachings of over the last 10, 15 years that I've been under their tutelage in different ways. Everything that's happening is actually against everything they've taught me. And you guys are deserving of the utmost respect, more so than, and I think the people I'm about to mention would say this. James Lindsay, who's done more for this movement, I think, than almost anybody, but a Chris Rufo. These people have done great things, but you guys are on the ground. You guys have fought for your hills, and you're still fighting for your hills at personal loss. And as a graduate student who just happened to start my doctoral work at the exact wrong time, I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I think you should be going into law school myself, but
you're not the first person to say that.
There are some other people like Gordon Klein at UCLA
Mhm.
and Elizabeth Weiss at San Jose State University. So there's some others out there who are trying to do their part, but you could probably count them on two hands. Okay, Richard, it's nice seeing you.
Yep.
again.
Yes.
Mark, nice meeting you in person. And
Yes,
so
nice to meet you.
I'll stay in the loop through thanks to Twitter.
Yes, well, and I want to have you guys back on every now and then, maybe once every 3, 4, 6 months, just to get updates, because I think these two men here tell it like it is. And follow, hey, I want you, give us your Twitter handles, because I think people need to follow you on Twitter and other things that you're doing. Charles, can you just give us your,
It's my name.
okay, at Charles Negy.
At Charles Negy.
Okay, and Richard.
Just Richard Lowery TX. My
Okay.
name was taken.
Yeah. Okay, and
Right.
follow them and support them. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.